They'll want to get started. They'll want to sort of see, for some of these athletes, for the first time, what this is like. And Josh, we said during the crew lineups, we've got in the stroke seat Saxon Stacey, 19 years old. Yes, lots of experience from Eton College, having rowed there at a pretty high level, one of the highest levels you can do at that sort of under 19 level. But to be thrust into the stroke seat in your first trial 8 is quite something. So second trial 8, my apologies.
Well, yeah, so I think with Saxon coming in as a returner from last year's ISIS crew, he has that sort of that tideway experience, but at the same time having that sort of that pressure being put on your shoulders of being in the stroke seat. There's a lot of responsibility to make sure that you set your crew up really well for this long race.
And a junior world champion himself from 2022, and I think plenty of international experience at that under 19 level. It won't be quite as daunting as coming into it fresh-faced, certainly. It's just as nerve-wracking, I think, on day one as it is on day 200 of turning up to these big races on these huge stages.
Yeah, the nerves never go away, no matter how many times you've done it. Every single time you're on that start line, it's there. The adrenaline is racing.
We can hear just these crews getting into alignment now. They'll be under the watchful eye of Sean Bowden, who'll be lining up those bow balls, and we can hear the voice of Matthew Pinsent, another athlete who knows what it feels like to sit in this position from 20 years or so ago now. He'll have been here, he'll have done this. These athletes all treading a similar path to Sir Matthew Pinsent, who will have the job of keeping these crews racing cleanly down the course and keeping them out of trouble to give them the best opportunity possible to execute as close to a race plan as possible that they'll mimic on the day. And we're underway now, near on 20 minutes to go in the Oxford University Men's Trial 8s for the 2024 boat race season. And wow, that's a really punchy start from Panic there on the right hand side of your screen.
So mimicked in a way what we saw in the women's race, actually. The crew on the right in the white top, they had a slightly punchier race start there, but actually I think they might have given themselves a little bit of an advantage. But again, it looks like Noise on the bottom of your picture, maybe in just a slightly lower rate, more sustainable rhythm perhaps.
Yeah, they're just coming past the commentary box now, and we can see that the crew in white, Panic, it's a slight lead, although we talked earlier about the water being nice and flat, but actually with 3 races now having gone down, it's starting to look a little bit bumpy.
Yeah, one of the things actually to note is the river's not closed for trial 8s. There's still plenty of traffic going up and down. We've had the launches whiz up and down for both the women's race, the lightweight races. So these guys will have the worst of it when it comes to that bounce. And it's similar on boat race day, right, Zoe?
Yeah, absolutely. And not only what's gone before them, but also the fact that the river's much higher. So the higher the river gets, the more water there is, the bumpier it gets as well. So actually, these guys are going to have potentially the more challenging conditions, although if you watch the races on Wednesday with Cambridge, I think you'd say relatively still pretty nice.
And again, I think it's a bit similar, not to compare it to Henley Royal Regatta, but I think lots of crews who race on the Henley stretch for the first time talk about the wash and the bounce being one of the most surprising things. Josh, did you find that kind of racing on race day with the amount of launches, crews, because the waves sort of bounce between the walls of the river, right? Do you feel that on race day, and is this good prep?
Yeah, very much so. And if you have a bouncy trial 8, yeah, it's fantastic practice. In my first year, when I was in ISIS, halfway through the race, the camera launch from the women's race had to come back for the men's race, and we just got a huge amount of wash that just sort of crashed over into our boat. And so any practice you get dealing with rough water is good. Yeah, it's good practice for the crews.
Well, the advantage of Panic is continuing to extend out here, and we must remember this is the most advantageous part of the race for that station that Panic is on. both crews now seem to have settled really well. It was a slightly slower start for Noise, who we've got in picture. They were much more consistent off the start, but a really good settle here from Panic has held them at just over half a length, I think.
Yes, I think Panic have used that early advantage that they had from their bend, from that little bit of advantage that they should have got. They've used it well, and Noise similarly, actually, you know, that they've still kept themselves in a good place. They haven't let Panic get away from them. They have kept the pressure on, and now what we'll see is when they come out onto the straight, and when you get more of that drag race, you know, crews side by side, no bend for a bit before it goes back in Noise's favour, we'll see, can Noise start to move himself back through?
Yeah, and as soon as the bends start to turn in Noise's favour, we should see them start to creep back into it, and as an athlete you'll be acutely aware of the noise from the other boat just becoming that little bit louder, just stroke by stroke, and that can really boost your morale.
Well, I'm really impressed, actually. Panic have got a new member in the stroke seat, right? We've got Jelmer Benema in the stroke seat, the Dutch athlete. Now, jumping in and stroking a crew, talk to us about what that's like, Josh, because that is really not easy.
It's hard work, especially as he's come from the other crew. So that other crew, yeah, we want both crews to be rowing in the same technical model, the same sort of rhythm, but A, he's come from the foreseat, and B, the rhythm and sort of model will be just ever so slightly different, so he's going to have to go into that crew and just really do the best job he can. But it looks as though Harry Glenister in the 7 seat is doing a fantastic job of just transmitting the rhythm that Jelmer's setting back down to the rest of the boat. Yeah,
hugely positive. Now, Zoe, as a Cox, you've got Tobias Bernard in that Cox's seat for Panic. What are you kind of trying to do with what your powers are as the Cox to get that to gel together?
I think, I think one thing actually that, you know, Sean is very, very strong on is that the boat moves forward no matter who's in it. So even once the blue boat's been selected, if someone gets sick and, you know, they pull someone in from ISIS, Sean is very much, you know, we don't just say, oh, well, this session's not going to be great because we've got a sub on. No, the boat continues to move forward. This boat, whichever boat goes out today, is the boat that can go out and beat Cambridge. So I think, you know, you have to kind of use that. But actually, I think what we can see here is what we kind of thought might happen, is that Noise have got a little bit of a sniff. Like Josh was saying, they've started to hear the other crew a bit more, and they're probably getting quite excited because they're thinking, oh, I'm putting myself back ahead, and my bend is yet to come.
Yeah, it looks like Saxon's doing a fantastic job. He's kept his head, and as they come into sort of rougher water past Harrods, they seem to be moving back into things, but also the crew seem to be moving slightly together as well. They're just being warned now by the umpire. Yeah,
Matthew Pinson there getting the flag out. You can just see in that umpire's boat behind, and I found it very interesting going to the women's briefing, the umpire's briefing. Richard Phelps talked about looking at where the bow balls are heading 4 lengths ahead, right? That's exactly what Matthew Pinson is looking for, is to try and avoid any collision 4 lengths prior, then call it as it comes. Now look at this. I think we've had a change in lead for the first time in this race. Noise looking a little bit bouncy, actually. I have been noting that wash definitely not subsiding, and it is certainly a bit of a choppy part of the course, this.
Yeah, that doesn't look particularly comfortable to row in. They seem to be keeping it pretty clean, but as you can see by the sort of the waves on the side of the boat against the yellow, you can see there's some real sort of ripple through the water.
Well, Panic, I think, are losing seat by seat here on the approach into Hammersmith. They haven't managed to transfer that confidence after leading out of the start into this middle part of the race. And I think if they're not careful here, Zoe, this can be a real sort of motivation killer, right? Being sliced through by a crew like this.
Yeah, the crews are coming together quite tight now, so I think, you know, if I was Noise, I would just want to make sure that I gave my crew enough space to use this. You know, they're rowing really well, they are moving away, they're on the inside of the bend, but look, they're coming so close together. You've got to be really careful at this point, and it looks like actually the 2 seat in the Panic boat, the trailing boat, just missed a bit of a stroke there, and this is what we were saying with practicing the clashing. They didn't clash there, but it's about really holding your rhythm when another boat gets close to you.
To me, it almost looked as though Will in the Cox of Noise was almost trying to push Panic slightly wide to push them off their line, so that Will can then so that they've then got to go even further around the outside of the bend.
And it's round the outside of the bend. This is where in the previous women's race that we followed, the outside of the bend crew really were trying to frighten, I think, the crew on Surrey, but we've had a flip of the script here in the men's race. It is Noise that are continuing to capitalise stroke after stroke on that inside line around the bend, a bit like being on an athletics track and being on that inside line. It's a really nice place to be, and they've almost managed a length there in what, 30 odd strokes, Josh?
Yeah, they've really come back into this race now, and now is the time for them to just capitalise on this advantage. It's all too often you see, especially in trilates, that the crew on the inside doesn't actually capitalise and use their advantage, whereas it looks as though Noise are really starting to try and sort of set, they're really in a nice rhythm, and they're just trying to move away from panic.
Now, we talked about on the run-up to this, the thing that the coaches want to see and that Sean Bowden will want to see is a close race. That means that the job of selecting match date has been done. Would we, we're almost at a length here, having gone around Hammersmith, past St Paul's. We're almost at the halfway point of the race. Is this good? Is this a close race, Zoe, or do we think that Sean would want to see the crews a little bit closer than this?
Yeah, I mean, look, one crew's always got to win, right? So I think what Sean's probably going to be looking at here is he wants to see how they respond to this situation. So are Panic going to panic and just let Noise row away from them, or are they going to, keep their nose in there, keep their bows as close as possible? Are Noise going to take advantage and move, or are they going to, get complacent and let Panic come back to them? So it'll be about those decisions that the athletes make and the coxes make. So it's still useful information to gather, I think.
And Josh, you were saying a little bit before the racing started that these names were chosen by the crews because of familiar phrases that were used by various athletes across both boats. So the fact that Panic is one of the crews, I don't know if that bodes well or not, but they are currently the crew that's trailing.
I would say perhaps Panic is an odd choice for a trilate's name. Normally in the past we've gone for, in my last year, we went for Rohan and Gondor, because it was two states that would then come together to sort of to defeat the evil that was Sauron, in this case Cambridge. But I don't know, not sort of, yeah, naming your crew Panic is, I don't know, a bit odd.
Now, Zoe, I'm going to come to you on this. We've got a bit of a station switch going on. Now, how common is this, and at what point as a cox do you choose to, sort of do a manoeuvre like this?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, because if something happened in your boat now, so if someone caught a crab, for example, and the boat stopped dead or lost speed really quickly, or they hit something, so many things in a race like this can happen, and the other crew surged back up to them, it causes a huge problem for the umpire. And theoretically, if you could say that crew was well off their station, they could be disqualified. I suspect Will has thought that, because he now looks like he is moving back more towards his own station. It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because you want to shut the door on a crew, but equally, if you're that far ahead, and do you need to take the risk? Is there anything to gain from doing that? If you're confident and you think you're going to keep moving away, your best option might be just to keep somewhere safe. But equally, if you think, well, I don't want to take the risk that this crew might move back, maybe you are a little riskier to give yourself just that little extra advantage.
Well, Panic here on picture. This is in the white tops, white base layers. Their cox, Tobias Bernard, has known this stretch of water like the back of his hand. Westminster School, that's based near the start line of the boat race. He'd have coxed this course many a time, Josh. So putting himself in a good position on the water. But look at this, look at the bumpiness of the water, and that won't be being helped by being behind and getting some of those puddles being pushed back from the Noise crew. Yeah,
Panic right in the wash of Noise, and that's a really hard place to be in, because it upsets the rhythm, and it's not just the sort of the waves and bumpiness that you've got from the river generally, but like being in that wash from another crew, unless you have that sort of bulletproof rhythm, it's really hard to sort of hold on to what you're doing.
Well, this distance just growing and growing, snowballing for Noise, who I think, given that little bit of extra distance they've got, are looking even more calm now. They're floating forwards, and this goes to show, look, no river closure on the water, and I think we've got potentially a little bit of an obstacle on the way.
Yeah, that looks like a motorised pleasure boat of some description up ahead. hopefully because the crews are, fairly comfortable in their distances at the moment, that's not going to cause an issue, but it certainly will send some wash back to the crews. And you can see also on the right hand side of your picture some other rowing boats out. So because this isn't a closed river for this race, you've got to contend with what's out there, and as a cox, that's why you've got to be looking ahead. You've got to be ready for these things, and most of the umpires will also be prepared for that. They'll have a plan, and they'll say beforehand, if there is something, we might have to steer around it, but I'll give you some instructions on that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what Matthew Pinsent was talking about when we had the briefing with the coxes. He explicitly said, if there is an obstacle, I will direct you both around it, just to if we have any problems because of the sort of lack of the river closure.
Now, it won't be a problem on race day. That is well, I say that. Zoe, again, I feel like I keep coming to you and being like, there won't be any obstacles on race day, but you yourself know that sometimes is not the case.
There shouldn't be any obstacles, although actually it depends, right? Because in that 2012 year, one thing we'd actually talked a lot about was because there'd been lots of flooding before the race. There was actually a lot of debris in the water. And so one thing that we'd really discussed with the umpires was what happens if we see something that's big that we have to potentially steer around. And in the week before the race, we'd seen, amongst other things, a fully upholstered sofa, an oil painting, and a fridge floating down the river. So there's always something, and that's what makes this course so special, is that the tideway, the Thames, loves to throw stuff at you like that.
And Josh, I don't know whether that sort of reminiscence of things, years gone past and learnings from previous races, like, the distance here between these two crews, there's less learning about how close you are, the blade clashing, being in that tight race, coming from this particular year of trial-8s. But how, when it comes to things like briefings, preparing, visualising, how many of those things from years gone past, like the swimmer in 2012 and obstacles potentially coming up, the weather, how much of that is kind of sewn into your preparation when it comes to things like visualisation?
So throughout the season we try and go over all sorts of the possibilities that the tideway could throw at us, and then especially in the last sort of 2 weeks leading up to the race, once we've sort of moved down to London from Wallingford, we go through these visualizations, we sort of talk about the possibilities and what we're going to do, talk about clashing, obstacles, just so that if the situation does arise, the athletes are able to, they feel far more prepared for it, and they know exactly what they're going to be doing.
I did say the sunshine isn't currently out, but it does certainly look like it from these pictures. Glorious scenes as we turn the corner and point the bows towards Chiswick Bridge as the sun sets here on the tideway. You can see why a lot of these athletes picked rowing over many other sports, because it makes the early mornings worth it for scenes like this. And the crew Noise, who currently lead there in the dark blue tops on the left-hand side of your picture, will be enjoying every single stroke of this. This is some margin that they've managed to accumulate here over Panic.
So it looks like they've gone a bit wide there around that bend, but it doesn't matter. They're comfortable, they're rowing a good rhythm. You saw Coxon Wildenegri looking back there, and actually I think he's realised he's too wide because he's just cut right back across, back onto the line. But they're rowing a strong rhythm, and there's not really anything that Panic are going to be able to do here. But I think again it draws back to this is about the squad, right? And from what I can tell, again with these guys, they're close. They were saying that one of their athletes is a bass player in a band, and they all went as a squad to watch him play a few weeks ago after they released their first album recently. So they're building this squad atmosphere. They're building a relationship, all of them, and they're building a story really to get them through the season and to race day.
Yeah, having a really good, strong atmosphere, like a very cohesive atmosphere in a squad, is one of the things that helps you win a boat race. It's something that we had in 2022 when Oxford won both the men's reserve and the men's race. And it was something that came from the president, Marty. He wasn't in the boat, in the blue boat, he was in the reserve boat, but from him, it was it filtered down to the rest of the squad that we had this really sort of positive atmosphere, and we were going to beat Cambridge no matter what with both crews.
And that's again, the phrase that comes to mind is you're only as fast as your slowest person, really, in the squad, right? It elevates the top end by your, in this case, across these 2/8s, that 18th athlete being as strong as they can possibly be. So even in this trailing crew in panic, they'll be doing everything, I'm sure, to sort of boost up those, fringe ends of the squad to be as strong as possible.
Yeah, very much so. You want to. It's all very well and good having a fantastic top end, but you need that depth as well, especially if people are going to get illness, an injury. You want to be able to sort of call up athletes who you're not going to be worried about slotting into a boat.
And also worth mentioning that Oxford have fewer returners from the Blue Boat than Cambridge do, so these experiences absolutely vital for the whole squad.
Well, floating towards the finish now, really pressing the legs down powerfully into the final few strokes. Nothing left really to row out of this trial-eights race for Oxford. This is Noyes coming in towards the line. Victorious Alex Underwood, Isaac Throsby, Hamish Rimmer, Freddie Orpin, Elliot Kemp, Elias Kuhn, Fred Roper and Saxon Stacey will cross the line, and that famous Blues post just outside of Tideway Scullers School, and followed by Panic, the trailing crew. And we saw in the women's race them both come together quite nicely at the end to congratulate one another. I hope we're going to see similar scenes here. And they're all going to return back to London Rowing Club in a few moments' time. They've got to paddle their way back first, I guess. But as a squad, what... do you kind of dissect the trial-eights together as the two crews? Do each crew do their separate debrief? How does that work, Zoe?
Well, the first thing you're going to look forward to is your Mars bar that you've got there in the boat ready for your row back, which is one of the worst bits, is that row back when the water's really rough and high and you're tired and it's getting dark and you're cold. But you can see the winning crew there. They're congratulating each other, but this isn't something like you'd see on the boat race. No, they're not standing up, they're not waving their oars around. This is part of the training process. This is part of the selection process. This is about building the squad. So this is just a start. And yes, they'll talk about it together. They'll probably watch the race. I'm sure they'll have separate conversations as well. But Sean will want to look back at this, and we'll see now that what played out and why it happened.